A woman walks into a pharmacy, gets turned away, walks into another one, gets turned away again. This goes on 20 times. 20. Before one pharmacist, one person who took 10 minutes finally gets her the medication she needs. That's not a story from 1995. Somewhere in this country, this is happening with a patient needing access. Meanwhile, the US is spending nearly $500 billion a year on prescription drugs. We have AI that can pass the bar exam, write code, diagnose cancer from a scan, and we still can't answer 7 words. Did the patient get the drug? The problem was never the technology. It's the system built to connect that patient to that drug were never designed to close a loop. I'm AJ. This is a Hub Brief, and we're going to talk about why my guest today, founder of Status 70, has built a company to answer that question reliably in real time across the whole network. Greg, really glad to have you here. Welcome to the podcast. And this is a pleasure for me to introduce you to my followers, my readers. And I want to start where this started for you. Before the platform, before the company, what did you see that you couldn't unsee and start off with why you founded the company?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, AJ, for allowing me for the opportunity to actually speak and engage with both you and the followers. I think we've had many, many great, passionate conversations about how, right, this simple question, right, how did the patient get access to the medication, is such just a critical notion to be able to, right, just a critical question to be able to answer, and just a notion that we still can't answer that today.
Hmm.
And I really do appreciate that opening where you told that story about that patient that went to about 20 different pharmacies before actually someone was able to take the step out and help that person and
Yeah.
be able to just take a few minutes of time. That if you were to ask me personally, when I knew a moment of, I said, yeah, there is a problem here that I need to solve, and that made it real. It really was number one that moment when that patient who had multiple myeloma came to my counter at the time when I was at a specialty pharmacy. And just that one interaction really unearthed and showcased how something so simple as just being both human and engaging, understanding, and showing empathy, and then actually taking a consistent approach and just saying, I'm here to support you, and let's hit pause and we'll be able to do it, is really what the not only just the nation needs, but philosophically how patient care really should be. And so that moment, it was one of my where I learned that for me what's important is going back and looking at structure and saying, looking back, why did this happen and where do things work and where do they break down. And that patient in particular motivated me. I'll never forget that day. I thought about her for a while thereafter, and really asking myself the question, well, why did this happen? Where does, when a patient gets something like this and they go through this really sometimes crippling diagnosis, who's there for their support and how do they do it? That really set the stage for me to say, I was more inquisitive. I like to build. I've always liked to build. Everything goes back to foundation. And so at that time, that motivated me to actually change and move on from pharmacy to get the exposure to the other side and to start to learn and ask myself the question, who makes the decisions, right? Why is it when a pharmacist gets a prescription, it gets rejected and we see things that appear on the pharmacy management system? Why does it happen? Who makes that decision? What can we do to impact it? That was my first foray into patient services when I left pharmacy to actually go into the service side of the industry. And then from there, I thought, right, I would get all the answers and I would be able to see and understand. And what ended up happening was I learned there was another step, that there was another journey point, that even on the other side, bringing these services, what they're called hub services, or thinking about distribution channel logistics and taking the time to looking at data architecture, I said, all right, the decisions are made even up further, right, where the life sciences company is bringing the drug to market. And so then I jumped over and went to the manufacturer side and spent about half a decade commercializing a few products. And then when I sat there on that final side, so having been the pharmacist years before, receiving filling the prescriptions and being the recipient of the key decisions, and then sitting on the commercial side of a life sciences company bringing the drug to market, I realized that there is such a misunderstanding of each of the different segments between what happens at the pharmacy with the patient and what the drug company is making a decision on, that was my moment where I said, this is why we can't answer the question, because the two sides don't get it. And there is not a layer in between. And nobody's actually telling that story. They're trying to, and they think, right? So they go and partner strategically. But that was my moment. And I would say about a few months ago, I myself and my partner, a co-founder, I had called her up and I said, and she's a many-year veteran in the specialty pharmacy space. And when I designed and built programs, that was my go-to pharmacy. We both know what good looks like, or I should say what great looks like. And we said, we can solve this problem. And we need to build a structure and a data layer in between. Those were kind of the defining moments that set my journey, I would say, down to where we are.
Mhm. And that's an important, framing, because what's powerful about that story is that patient does not have an AI or technology team. It's why should it rest on the patient to get access to medication? The system should support the patient. It's built for the patient. Patient is spending money, time, admin cost, and frustration, really, the emotions to get access to that medication. So the system should work for them. And I think it's also a good testament to the fact that this is not a failure of technology, it's a failure of design. I mean, the technology that you are trying to build to be that integration layer is the answer to that $1 million question of, can the patient get access to that drug? Or did they get access to that drug? And I think this is to the core problem that we've already talked about in our previous conversations, that everyone is doing point solutions. Everyone is making solutions that support a part of the problem, never looking at taking a step back. And from your story, you've seen it through different lenses, through different stakeholders that support that. So what do you have to say about, can we really improve the data quality?
So I fundamentally believe that the answer is, can we improve the data quality? Yes. But I do not see a world if there is not a change or an acknowledgement to understanding why we don't have the data quality today and why it's broken and fragmented. If we cannot acknowledge that that is what we need to solve, I do not think we can advance until we go back to say we need a rewrite, a redo, or thinking about a reset. And I say that, right, I don't say that lightly, and I think that's part of the mission of Status 70. It's because when you adopt first order principle thinking, you go back to the roots, and then you actually go to ask yourself, what are you solving? Then that question that we're starting with is, did the patient get access to the medication? Then you start to say, how do they get access to it? Is this the right service model that we're making these decisions around? Do we need to deploy, technology here to support a frictionless experience, or are we putting a band-aid versus, is there another opportunity that really something else that we didn't see, that maybe some of our market research told us when we were doing, say, ATUs with patients, that now we can actually bring it forward? But in the current landscape, the design and the model is transactional. And you see it down all the way at the end to the pharmacy systems. The goal of a pharmacy management structure in a pharmacy is to move a prescription from A to B, right? A to Z. On the EMR, it's to move patients right all the way upstream to get through the system, check the boxes, and be able to bill based on transactional moments. And so if you think like a transaction, and if you then the outcome or the measure is more claims, more prescriptions, you're not changing the fundamental structure. And then that question that we're asking, it's, why didn't the patient get it? What barriers prevented them? You can't get to that answer because you're not being patient centric.
And I think historically speaking, we've always treated them as transactions. Like claim inherently at its fundamental level is a transaction. It's not meant to support a patient experience. So the way we look at that data is totally different, or we record that data is totally different. And similarly, I was reading up a white paper on clinical trials, and it said that there were 70 billion data artifacts, unsupported, unstructured data facts that go into real world evidence and clinical trial data. And this is just that part of commercialization. We're not even talking about patient, something that a patient really needs access to. So the monumental challenge is behemoth, right? And I think this is what doesn't get said enough in this space when we talk about AI, because every prior authorization, every appeal, every copay intervention, every triage escalation, there is no systematic way of knowing that it worked because the data foundations are unstructured. They don't support each other. And the feedback arrives, at best, like 3 to 4 weeks later in data and claims data, as we just talked about. It's transactional. It's never meant to support the patient experience. So AI can never see what data it needs to contextualize. So how do we solve that gap?
So I think, right, again, and it goes back to the thesis to status 70, that how do you, and to your point, think about those billions of data artifacts. And there are system structures that were built to solve a purpose, right? And to do, whether it's the EMR, whether it's a point solution, whether it is a phone structure or to make a phone call or an outreach. All of these technology advances are key and critical to make it both the transaction go through, but also to provide a service. But you solve this by going one level up and looking at those connections and establishing what are the commonalities that we're looking for to be able to then translate and ask ourselves, what's the story, right? What are we trying to tell? And what I believe, it's when you look at the transaction as a performance and you assume that whatever company, whatever provider, whoever you're interacting with, that patient is going, is that their job is to fundamentally do or perform a very strong foundational service. You don't want to go into a mindset of your process is broken, I need to go fix it. What you want to do actually is look at their system and say, I don't need to fix that because your goal is you're serving your patients. What I need to do is understand your behavior. And when I understand your behavior, I will then build a layer to translate that behavior so that we could be able to tell your foundational story. And then I think that is where, if you were to say something like this 10, 15, 20 years ago, where and just go back to life sciences and contracting with patient services companies and hub vendors, they built transaction based architectures to be able to pull through service and prescriptions. Now we have technology that exists that can move a lot faster, that can think, right, that with the proper prompting be able to adjust and adapt and learn. We can take those data architectures and reframe it and continue to let them provide those services. But our then goal is to, how do we unearth the story and how do we translate that more strongly and be able to tell it? And I think letting the technology, the providers out there continue to do those and reframe, how do we get that data to look more towards what are you doing well, and let me pull apart those steps. That, I think, is where the power lies into a more of a foundational structure that is not changing taxing systems, but more actually unearthing and pulling from the value that those systems are doing without disrupting a user's interface or workflow.
That is a very strong point. And the reason I say it's a strong point is because I was interacting with new age entrepreneur in this area pretty much yesterday, who is looking to employ a AI solution at a provider space. And his biggest problem was providers don't want to spend time. I'm like, that's right, because they do not have the incentive to make patient experience priority because they are already so swamped with admin work, with, seeing hundreds of patients. They just would not have time to change their behavior. So the trick here, as you said, and you mentioned it absolutely right, the trick really is to extrapolate their behavior and use that to infer data. Because more often than not, we think everyone is as invested in solving this problem as we are. But I think that's revolutionary reframing of the same problem, that providers being the first touch point for any patient, you're flipping the decision making not on the provider or the patient, but on the integration layer itself. It's incumbent on AI to infer rather than having provider infer it for AI.
And I think when you start to look at then and go into a provider, for example, then once you develop the layer or the prompting or the understanding, and you put together the tools to support the insights, and it starts to get both, I'm gonna use the term smarter, that administrative burden, for example, the administrative burden, you get the opportunity to look at the existing workflow in a different way, and
Mhm.
then you can pull in the point solution or a different opportunity now and enable more time spent focused on patient care. And then you can leverage the layer or the thinking to then solve some of the administrative burden and free up those doctors' time. Right. So you're shifting the focus to say what's going on, connecting, thinking, looking at the best attributes, and then you turn the conversation back towards, now we can really optimize and what's most important where you're providing value, which is patient care. And let's then leverage AI now that they know how you operate. Now we have a structure to understand that, then the optimization can happen.
So I want to take a step back and talk about how does it look from a manufacturer standpoint, right? I mean, they are increasingly investing experience as a function of their market access, right? And to a point, they want to bring hubs in house, right? An issue with commercial teams is to understand how they can influence those decisions, those behaviors. So from FRM not seeing why this appeal or prior authorization was denied, to not understanding where the patient is in the journey. When a manufacturer can see is in real time versus 3 days, 4 days out of the loop, how do you solve for that in this new paradigm?
So you see some of the manufacturers, I would, especially in the GLP-1 space, for example, that are
Hmm.
building these direct to patient models. And what is that direct to patient model that they're doing? It's, when you look at how they're structuring, they're taking what I would argue is, or attempting to take best in class providers from different potential offerings, and then leveraging a common ecosystem or infrastructure, right, to be able to pull in and tie together all the different services that they like to show and be able to attempt to tell a story in one cohesive, I would say, ecosystem or
Hmm.
structure. And so what they're starting to acknowledge, it's that in the past, everybody tries to or wanted to pick an outsourced company that can do everything all in one stop shop, thinking that there was right seamless or streamlined efficiencies within that one company. But then they realized, again, with both data exchange technology and access to information, it was restricted because everything was there under that one house, and they didn't have the structure or how they can take it in. Then they started to realize, then they started to change their behavior over time. And then you start to get hybrid models. And then you start to say, I want to build it in house, because going back to what we've been talking about, the closer you are to home, which is the life sciences company and their product, the more control that they can feel about how they can influence or change the paradigm to, make sure that when that prescription is written, or that prescriber made the clinical decision that this is the right medication for the patient, they are able to see as close as possible to whatever barriers that would have stopped that from happening, to make that process as streamlined and efficient as possible. So there's investments, as you were saying, what they're trying to do to fix or to try and adjust is, how do you look at what is the service we want to provide or the outcome that we're trying to achieve. And it's more than just, right, just simply starting the drug. It's creating an experience so that that patient has a frictionless experience to be able to get it and stay on it. Um, and so what they're looking at, it's as they're doing these data maps or as they're doing these service interactions, they're starting to bring in their commercial analytics team, I would say a little earlier. They're
Hmm.
starting to embed not market access conversations into marketing. And what they're doing is, what is the brand identity and how are these attributes going to apply at once the drug leaves the distributor and starts to get into the channel? What touch points do I have and how do I combine them? And so direct APIs, direct connections, integrations, all of these are being built at these different intersections, and then they're starting to absorb them. And I think, and maybe as I can infer, they're on the right path. What I have yet to see is, yes, they're building a more connected structure, but there's not a translation mechanism to tie it together, if that makes sense. I don't see a standard dictionary, for example. I don't see a way of thinking. I don't see what is my story. What I see more of is taking disparate systems, trying to put them together, and then looking at my raw and structured data and what maybe insights I can pull versus how do I transform it into the narrative that I'm looking for, and then being able to tell and showcase that story.
I'm going to do a shameless plug into one of the blogs that I've written about this problem is how disconnected and fragmented that story is. And because at the end of the day, it really narrows down to that narrative that we are trying to solve, which is a seamless patient journey through and through. And we're not revolutionizing this concept of we don't need 90% of the stakeholders in the patient journey. We're not saying that. We are saying we just need a better way of looking at the data holistically so we can, as you say, and I love that framing, I'm going to keep using it, behavioral inferencing, so that we are not just blindly, AIing everything. We are creating incremental steps, incremental progress towards creating more structure really in this space. I mean, it's not going to be an overnight thing. Billions of dollars being spent, billions of dollars more going to be spent on this problem, but we are trying to create a way that's sustainable, that's scalable.
Correct.
Um,
I think that's important, sustainable, right? Then it becomes scalable, and then it takes it to the next level.
so the data foundation has to come first. And because without it, every point solution, every automation, every AI workflow is just a faster version of same broken loop, right? That's what the conclusion from our conversation is. And what's the persistent problem with point solution in this space, right? I think you've alluded about this in my previous question, but if you don't mind expanding a little bit more on why is there in this space really, why is there more investments, more, as I, after talking to a lot of people, why is there more investments in point solution, not in strategic long-term sustainable solution that has a wider, more integrated approach?
And I just did a session with a client, I want to say within the past few weeks, where when you think about sometimes why we haven't advanced as quickly as we have, I've always had this philosophy of, in order to be successful, check your own house first and make sure that the bones are strong, that it's organized the correct way, and that there's key alignment internally before then you can then project and really excel in the external environment. And
Hmm.
when you think about life sciences companies, all the way down from even a small emerging biotech all the way to a large company, you can tell a lot by the advancement of how are they structured, what's the leadership approach and the thinking, when you start to engage with potential companies, who are you talking to, when, how often are people being introduced, who's being introduced, and watching their own internal way of working and dynamic and perspectives around, right, the service that they may or may not be asking you to provide or trying to get insights into. And so the story with the client that I was talking about is that everybody wants a best in class service. But then when you ask the question, what does best in class mean? And you get 20 different answers from 20 different stakeholders, that misalignment becomes the foundation for how the point solutions start to try and solve your questions or your perceived needs. So what I see happening is life sciences companies may think they have a patient engagement problem because the fragmented data tells them that, and the key person that is evaluating the data is structured in the organization because their primary focus is looking at this. And then they make an investment, but there's not a communication to say, and it could be something as simple as a HCP patient interaction, but the patient services is doing one thing and the FRM team doesn't have a proper connected way of working or know how to do it. So then they make as an assumption that I need to solve this problem and find this specific product market fit for this specific instance without then going back and seeking alignment internal. So the more fragmented the structure is within organizations, you tend to see more investments structurally based on how those organizations are organized. And I'm not right. There are a lot of great point solutions out there. There are things that have advanced how we quality monitor and listen to calls and get sentiment and pull those information, automation up front on intake, leveraging the power of automated electronic benefits, and then taking that to pull a workflow through without the need for, say, a key human touch in certain areas. But a good real telling sign is, right, these companies are answering the needs of what the pharmaceutical manufacturers are asking for, and they are providing the service, but are we asking the right question? Right? Are we trying to solve the right? And I think that's where the difference is happening, why there's such a
And
rise.
and to be honest, you just validated one of the things that I am working on is a framework for that situation where essentially anytime we talk about AI, point solutions, integration solutions, infrastructure solutions, anything to do with technology, one thing I realize is missing from the industry in general is coming back to our first point is the friction between different stakeholders, and you framed it just right, that field reimbursements has totally different set of concerns to someone at the field, intake level or the patient services level, right? And what I am doing now is extrapolating that friction into cross healthcare systems. So I'm saying if I am a pharmacy or a manufacturing company, what is my friction with patients, payers, providers? So now you are not only looking at your intercompany organization friction, now you're looking at industry wide friction because any technology stack you deploy is going to impact people who are going to be working with you on a contracting basis. So we always miss that friction point. And hopefully in the next few weeks I'll have you back on my podcast after we review the framework. But that framework demonstrates the need for organizations to think more broadly into the way their solutions impact across the healthcare chain of command, if you will, and how interconnected we are, even though we might be 2 to 3 steps removed. So I think that the vision needs more conversation. So I want to go back to, and I know we've touched upon this multiple times, but for someone listening in who is trying to understand the audacity of healthcare, especially pharma, and trying to really ask a question, which is, how does it help me? What is the simplest solution to my problem? What is my 10 years down the line, Gregory and AJ have fixed this problem? How will my life change?
So can you imagine if, and this would be, I would say, the expectation of any consumer looking for a product, but they say, I need or want a product, and they have the right financial means to go buy that product, right? They can go on Amazon, right? Press a button, they can go get it, they can access to it. And what happens, right? 9 times out of 10, it just works, right?
Yeah.
They just get it. And I think healthcare, right, where it's, where you need the balance, right, where you need the service, and it, because it's not, this is not for gratification. This is, predominantly for health and well-being. But really, if you can fix this problem and answer this question, right, or be able to address the barriers of access, I'm not saying that you'll be access free, friction free, right? But what you will be, it's the system should more times than not work. And you should be able to leave a prescriber's office and get the prescription. And I know, right, it's something that, right, it just sounds so simple, right? But if you think about the complexity behind the scenes of what it takes to pull that off, from all the way from the distribution chain to all the different components, it doesn't have to be, right? It shouldn't have to be that complex, but it is. And so you see in real life this happen, that you just can't, right, that there's so many breakdowns and touch points, that if you just had a structure, really the ideal state in 10 years, it's like, if you need a medication, you should be able to get it. And you should be able to get it within a reasonable frame that is sufficient to provide you with care. And that's really what it should be. The best services usually that you get, people always remember how you make them feel, right, when you interact, and there's a brand identity. But the real winning services that exist just work, right? You get the expected outcome consistently, and there should be no difference here. And especially when both your health is on the line, you're going through different emotional, self-awareness, there's family impact, caregiver impact, there is so much at stake in this particular regard, that this should not be the barrier that occurs.
I agree. It should be as simple as ordering a product. I'm on medication. I went in to pick up that. I was told you have to have a mail in. If I travel 25% of my time, how am I going to get access? The whole idea is you cannot look this problem from one lens. All friction points have to be laid out visually for us to really understand the impact each of the stakeholders make on the entire system that ultimately impacts the patient, who, you have to remember, does not have a team standing right next to them. They don't have billions of dollars to go through their EOBs and prior authorizations and PBM decisions and understanding where to mail in the check or get the patient records transfer. The problem that we just talked about extrapolates in rare diseases, oncology spaces, where the pain is real, the fatality is real, the patient experience is much worse for that patient. Um, and how do you compare this with, I'm not sure if you have, but have you looked at other countries, developed healthcare, system like ours? Do you see any lessons that we can learn from over the pond?
So I think that there is I'm going to take you back to the infrastructure and data layer. I think, regardless of, whether it's, government sponsored health systems, single payer structures overseas, or complexity here nationally, everyone I talk to, whether it's global or your national US based, there's always an opportunity to get closer and closer to see, as in near real time as possible, what is impacting that a particular patient journey, to make sure that if there is an intervention point that could happen, to make that they are getting the care that they need, regardless of the different structures, the different payment systems and healthcare systems, it still is a pervasive and, I would say, significant unmet need in the space. And so there are, even closest border, say in Canada or some of the European countries, there's opportunities, there's investments going into, real time inventory tracking of prescription movements. just to make sure that it's stocked there at the particular pharmacy, who can order, where's it going, and the distribution logistics. And then all the way up to patient encounters. Like, what are
Mhm.
when a pharmacist does a clinical consultation right in Spain, what are the metrics that they're pulling in the data that they're able to source from that data? Because, right, it is a different, structure. They have more, I would say, prescriptive authority or lack thereof, where patients can just get medication by visiting a pharmacist. So despite the different models, there's still significant data fragmentation, and it's still, in one way, shape, or form, will delay care, or it was still one way, even prevent access unintentionally.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great insight. I have spoken to people in Middle East about this issue because I believe that their access to or interoperability frameworks are more relaxed than ours because of course, patient rights are less controlled, for lack of a better term. And it provides opportunities for healthcare companies to have an open conversation about how data can move boundaries and provide better patient experience, but at the same time, at what cost, right? So even though the reality for US healthcare system is we have to work within the bounds which are there to protect our patients, but that should not be beholden to the patient experience. We need to create an industry-led standard. There is huge amount of progress by CMS to cut down costs because of this, and hopefully that would work hand in hand with investments in this technology as AI gets stronger, and people see the value in consolidating a fragmented data. Well, Greg, thank you. This is exactly the kind of conversation the industry needs to be having, and more people need to be having this conversation. For everyone listening, follow Gregory and Status 70. Keep this conversation going. We'll link everything in the show notes. And until then, hang on, and we'll see you next time.